And done. So, the album's come out. Based on the discourse around it, you'd think she released her own version of Trout Mask Replica with lyrics that alternate between Dick and Jane and praise for a certain Austrian painter.
Play, 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 and the haters gonna hate, 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 hate.
If there's one thing that differentiates my experiences as a Swiftie from my experiences in other fandoms, it's feeling like I must be more autistic than I previously thought, because a lot of what both fans and haters complain about are often things I genuinely cannot imagine caring about. That's not to say I think the album's great. Most of the songs are fine as I'm listening to them, but I don't really have the desire to re-listen once the 20-second TikTok is over, with a few exceptions. I don't want to focus too much on my opinions though, because, I mean, let's be real, who gives a fuck? If you like the album, you've already been made to understand why people dislike it. And if you dislike it, your reasons are either pretty straightforward or based in internet-induced psychosis. Instead, what I hope to do here is explore what I think the album is, what it could have been, and how it fits into the unofficial trilogy Taylor began with Midnights. You see, within the context of Taylor's discography, The Life of a Showgirl is not an album meant to put the pop songs in the bag, but is actually the finale of a deftly told, multi-album story about learning to love the parts of yourself that put the pop songs in the bag. In all seriousness, I think the larger context of the album reveals fascinating tensions that have haunted Taylor throughout her career, the most pertinent of which being the tension between the self as the innate essence of one's being and the self as a market commodity. So, let's start at the beginning. Within the first 24 hours of the album going live, I saw a tweet claiming that this is the first time in her career that Taylor Swift has nothing to say. And while that's a fair criticism, it's not exactly true. If we take the vinyl and CD poems, which I'll put up on the screen in case you want to pause and read them, it's clear that Taylor has plenty to say about the emotional complexities of touring, labeling it a monotonous thrill even as she takes the millisecond to mouth a few words to someone she once saw at 14, now a grown woman with her own child. She describes the crowd as having expressions like mood rings. It's also majestic. Of course it is. It's a lot of other things, too. Whereas she once described herself as having an empire in a golden age and as being unafraid of pretenders, now she describes the crowd as your king who has ruled over you for centuries benevolently, for the most part. Even within the album itself, the white diamonds she has forever and Elizabeth Taylor are reduced to mere sequins by the final track. The songwriting memos for songs like The Fate of Ophelia, Eldest Daughter, and The Life of a Showgirl also sketch a darker portrait, such as Eldest Daughter originally having "It's been a fatal 30 years in fear" in its first verse, or Taylor ad-libbing the chorus of Showgirl to be said by the narrator into a mirror. I and many other Swifties saw these poems and these memos and asked why, if these ideas are interesting and match up with the theme of the album, they aren't on the album. I think the reasons for this are twofold. Firstly, and perhaps most importantly, a lot of non-Swifties tore songs like Who's Afraid of Little Old Me to absolute shreds. When you see the clips from the Eras tour, people go nuts for that song. But if you're outside the fandom, or show business in general, a lot of people seem to either willfully not get it or just not care. As class tensions escalate, many people are exhausted of being asked to sympathize with celebrities, especially as more and more of them are outed as either genuinely awful people or just careless bystanders. While we can talk about how the sheer viciousness Taylor faces is rooted in misogyny, there is still the fact that she's actively choosing to lead this life. Additionally, Taylor's naked eagerness to capitalize on her fans makes her an easy embodiment of American hyperconsumption. The rollout for this album focused almost exclusively on countdowns extravagantly announced via glitter showers on Apple, Google, and TikTok, all for the exclusive opportunity to give her more of your money. You want a lead single? What are you, fucking poor?
Spare change, ma'am.
Squidward? Squidward, is that you?
So, if you're someone whose concept of Taylor Swift's artistry begins and ends with Shake It Off, seeing people posting about pre-ordering 47 vinyls and 83 signed CDs while you struggle to pay rent has gotta be pretty galling. Sure, the vast majority of Swifties only buy one copy and the digital variant drops result in even the most diehard cupcake raising her pirate flag, but the internet doesn't like facts, it likes outrage. Which brings me to my second point. If we take the outro of the title track as an admission that the whole album has been a show for us rather than a true backstage tour, I'll unpack more on why we should in a moment, then the poems and memos represent what the showgirl doesn't want her audience to hear. But why shouldn't we hear it? Is it the fear of boring us, or making us feel bad, or getting torn apart again on Twitter? It may be much simpler. See, we Swifties may enjoy the songs about fame sucking, but at a certain point there's nothing you can politely respond to them with beyond, okay, then take a break. If part of Midnights and Tortured Poets is Taylor reckoning with her own complicity in her situation, and that the life of a showgirl is something she has to actively choose to love, as per the prologue poem, then it makes sense to not include those thoughts as part of the main album. She knows, and we know, that she's not going to leave. As the title track says, she's immortal and couldn't die if she tried, so there's really no point in complaining about it so much. If you want to make a marriage work, you don't remember why you initially fell in love with someone by writing, recording, and then promoting an entire album about how they're an awful person. This idea of marriage, not between her and Travis, but between these two conflicting selves, is the idea I want to explore the most in this video. See, one of my theories before the album dropped was that it would be largely from the perspective of Taylor Swift, the brand, who I'll be calling Showgirl Taylor from here on out. For the uninitiated, one of the most interesting theories around Taylor's work is called Two-Taylor theory, which postulates that there is an ever-present tension between the media machine of Taylor Swift TM and the authentic person trapped beneath. This theory has a large history, but was most concretized in the Anti-Hero music video, with the fun party girl Taylor pointing to herself at the first utterance of "I'm the problem, it's me." Not only is there a star beneath her eye, but she is decked out in the orange and green we now know are Showgirl's colors. Credit where credit is due, this theory seems to have originated with Gaylors, who positioned these two selves as diametrically opposed to each other, essentially portraying Showgirl Taylor both as a hapless puppet and as the high school cheerleader shoving sensitive, authentic Taylor into a locker, except in this case the locker is also the closet. But hey, who can even blame them when the lead up to this album had a vinyl cover with Taylor's hair darkened similarly to her Mean Girl character in the You Belong With Me music video, and a whole Target ad where Taylor both insults and directs a klutzy showgirl version of herself, decked out in haute couture based on Elizabeth Taylor's jewelry.
It's giving no girl, not showgirl. What are we doing?
Indeed, many elements of the rollout were in tension with the happy, vibrant pop album Taylor claimed it would be on the podcast. The official cover art is a confirmed reference to Ophelia's death. Two of the early vinyl variants look like stills from a psychological thriller, and the New York pop-up generally highlighted lyrics that pointed towards darker themes, such as "You want to take a skate on the ice in my veins," and "Oftentimes it doesn't feel so glamorous to be me," a line written in lipstick on a mirror, seemingly in reference to Elizabeth Taylor's movie Butterfield 8. In that film, Liz's character believes the guy she's just slept with has left her money because he thinks she's a prostitute. In response, she angrily scrawls "no sale" on his mirror. It's worth noting that Elizabeth Taylor herself hated this movie, as she was strong-armed by MGM into making it and thought the studio was punishing her for trying to leave by making her play this degrading character.
Oh, face it, Mama. I was the
You're a joke. A dirty joke from one end of this town to the other.
But that isn't the album we got. So what gives? With Reputation, the bait and switch turned many away, but in hindsight, it at least makes sense. It provides some needed tension to the album's love story and reasserts to listeners that Taylor is a person rather than a headline generator. The bait and switch is far more out of place here, considering she literally told us the album was exuberant and electric and vibrant in the same podcast where she announced it. Aha, yes, through my devilish tricks I have beguiled you into listening to the type of album most of you wanted anyway. Girl, what? Maybe she's playing 13D pickleball with us and made the album seem darker on purpose, so that when someone showed you the leaked lyrics to Wood, you wouldn't believe them.
One of the things that I wanted to do was like toe that line.
Take God, your mind. Then again, there has been a lot of dissonance within this rollout. In the release party of A Showgirl, Taylor says before it ruined the friendship that she hasn't written about high school since Folkmore, despite then telling Ryan Seacrest that Midnight Rain is about a high school love. In the podcast, she said she is not online, but then for Wood, she allegedly licensed a popular tweet making fun of the way she writes about sex. The song Eldest Daughter, per her explanation to Zane Lowe, is satirically built around the dissonance of earnestness and internet cringe. Apple Music's Instagram caption for the interview even starts with "life as a satire." Over and over, Taylor has emphasized the fact that she is playing different characters in the song. In the release party, the song Elizabeth Taylor was framed as half cosplay. In a radio interview, she said she picks her curse words based on what would fit the character she's portraying. In her interview with Jimmy Fallon, she described Tortured Poets as highlighting the character of the poet, versus this album which highlights the character of the showgirl. More interestingly, she also said,
As sort of entertainers, one of our main jobs, I think, is to be a mirror for people. You look into the art we make, you see yourself back.
And again to Zane Lowe,
what our goal is as entertainers is to be a mirror. Oftentimes an album is a really, really wild way to look at yourself.
Now, how does that go along with calling the album a self-portrait?
One of the things that I wanted to do was like toe that line between painting a really clear picture of how my life felt, but also like knowing the kind of things that my fans love in terms of from a lyrical perspective, from a story perspective.
Wait, I still don't get it. Like Reputation before it, the album's rollout brings into focus what Danish scholar John Hiltharder calls biographical performativity, which in the words of Kajsa Reynoldsen is defined as artists making use of themselves and other real persons in an aesthetic manner in order to interact with the reactions of readers and the public. I say in the words of because I was unable to find Harder's work in English, so I'm having to trust the translations Rendleton provides in their thesis. Every time you call me crazy, I get more crazy. Sylvia Plath of Taylor Swift and Confessional Performances. Harder's idea of biographical performativity contrasts with both autobiography and autofiction, which is essentially writing fan fiction about yourself if you didn't know. And that biographical performativity focuses on the undertaking of a biographical speech act and how said speech act is performed, rather than the truth value of the statement. Here, Harder attempts to capture a type of literature where text and experience are in a continual, anachronous dialogue with one another, saying that writing biographically is not just describing the past, but also to act in the present, and by doing so, affecting the future. Although Harder applied this specifically to Scandinavian authors, Rendleton expands the theory to the works of Sylvia Plath and Taylor Swift, arguing that both authors function as examples of the perilous synthesis of artistic product, personal biography, and public persona achieved by narrative social processes. Perhaps the most literal example of what Rendleton means here is the Look What You Made Me Do music video, wherein different Taylors parody, bury, and berate the many public perceptions of her. Biographical performativity is also deeply concerned with what theater scholar Erica Fisher-Litch calls liminality, wherein the distinctions between art and life shift so frequently that they just up and collapse. Frequently cited here are the works of Marina Abramovich, who is best known for performance art like 1974's Rhythm Zero, where for 6 hours she let audience members do whatever they wanted with her and the 72 objects she'd brought, which included a gun someone tried to get her to use on herself. After the performance was over, as Abramovich describes,
I started being myself because I was there like a puppet just for them. And that moment, everybody ran away. People could not actually confront with me as a person.
As Rendleton writes, the discomfort and confusion awoken in the audience by destabilizing the borders between art and reality are key to investigating and revealing the strategies behind configuring authenticity in an artwork, one of the strategies being the real wounds that the artist exposes. Meme to hell though it is, there is a real wound being simultaneously revealed and dismissed in the infamous line, "The old Taylor can come to the phone right now." Reputation in both its album and Eras tour forms is marked with images of rupture, particularly glass shattering, the glass cell shattering and ready for it, the car crash with slow-mo glass flying and Look What You Made Me Do, the boxes of older Taylors being shot through on the Eras stage, and the stage itself becoming a mirror Taylor cracks with her boots. And now we have All the Pieces of Me Shattered as the crowd was chanting more, from a song repeatedly referenced not only in the Life of a Showgirl promo, but in the trailer for the Eras Tour docuseries. Taylor attempting to push her audience into this liminality would explain the constant use of fragmented shards and body parts on the covers, another element that convinced people that something darker was happening. Additionally, as she says in the prologue poem, all these lives converge here, the mosaics of laughter and cocktails of tears. Mosaics, of course, are often made with fractured glass. The following line, where fraternal souls sing identical things, to me is about her and the concert crowd, again emphasizing the idea of the album as the performance itself rather than the backstage. Oh, have I mentioned that Taylor confirmed that the track titles were intentionally shaped like the Eras Tour stage? After announcing the docuseries, the Disney Plus Twitter account even posted a graphic of Taylor walking from a dark purple backstage towards an open orange door. We're the orange guys, the performance hasn't stopped. Even if we look at the album as the behind the curtain of a showgirl's life, contradictions still abound. In The Fate of Ophelia, the key is clearly meant to recall the keys that I hated here, the key to the secret garden that then became the Eras Tour stage. Even if we ignore the greater context, it's still an emotionally charged symbol, and on Wood it's turned into a dumb punchline that doesn't even match the song's theme of playing on superstitions. Eldest daughter insists she's not a bad bitch when that's the exact character she tries to play in Cancelled. In Wishlist, she says all she wants now is to be left alone to pop out kids, whereas on Elizabeth Taylor, she quickly follows up saying that she'd trade the Cartier for someone to trust with. Just kidding. Speaking of Elizabeth Taylor, this one is more of a deep cut, but the line, "All my white diamonds and lovers are forever," is both a reference to Elizabeth Taylor's perfume White Diamonds and, potentially, walk with me here, the 1971 James Bond film Diamonds Are Forever, as the composer John Barry, by sheer coincidence, also has an album for a 1963 TV documentary called Elizabeth Taylor in London. The actual song Diamonds Are Forever, performed by Shirley Bassey, features the line, "Men are mere mortals who are not worth going to your grave for," which is really funny coming after The Fate of Ophelia. But even if that wasn't intended, Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton first married while Burton was preparing to play Hamlet on Broadway, which to me proves that the song coming after Fate of Ophelia is no accident. Now that's a classic Taylor contradiction, swearing you've been saved by love and then immediately looking around for the hidden cameras. This album's rollout has been hilarious, if only for seeing so many people alternate between crashing out over their goat being washed and desperately convincing themselves it's all performance art. I feel like I'm actively performance art pilling myself just writing all this out. But let's not get carried away. Plenty of people genuinely like and even love this album. Despite all the hate, it smashed the debut record set 10 years ago by Adele's 25, with over 4 million units sold. My theater for the release party was pretty packed, and even though I only saw 2 people getting up and dancing, people were still clapping and seemingly enjoying themselves. And honestly, if Taylor Swift wanted to release her own version of Bob Dylan's Self-Portrait, which Dylan has described as essentially a rage bait album and to get rid of his most annoying fans, she definitely could and should have done a lot worse. I mean, if she really wanted to parody the idea that she needs an editor, All the Tired Horses, the first track of Self-Portrait, is literally the same 2 lines repeated over and over for a little over 3 minutes. Holy fuck, it's 3 minutes and 13 seconds. The signs are all there. Okay, I'm done goofing around. To return to the mirror theme, the sequencing of certain motifs demonstrates the primacy of this showgirl persona over other aspects of her life. For example, flowers are mentioned several times, but the tone in which they're mentioned changes from song to song. In Elizabeth Taylor, the second track, she says, "All the right guys promised they'd stay. Under bright lights they withered away, but you bloom." In Eldest Daughter, the 5th track, we have Ferris wheels, kisses, and lilacs. And then in Ruin the Friendship, the 6th, "A wilted corsage dangles from my wrist." The next time we see this imagery, she's picked apart a daisy in the opening line of track 9, Wood. And then in the next track, Cancelled, she likes her friends like poison thorny flowers. Point being, the flower imagery is becoming less sincere and more tongue-in-cheek as the album goes along. Although the song Wood says she doesn't need to catch a bouquet, the only bouquet she's actually given is in the closer, The Life of a Showgirl. In the final chorus, after she's given the bouquet, she declares that she's married to the hustle. I guess bringing up marriage in Eldest Daughter was just to hit the lavender haze again. I also find it funny how the muse she's eager to make her forever nightstand is associated with wood, not just because redwood is, again, a likely reference to a Stan Twitter meme, but because Taylor's publicist is literally known by the nickname Tree. I mean, come on, that has to be intentional. Does this question of whether her engagement's a PR stunt actually matter? Not really. At the end of the day, if she's a showgirl, you're still only going to get what she wants to show you. But it is really funny. In really the only positive video I've seen on this album, the hosts of Switched on Pop describe it as a polyphonic autofiction, where Swift writes from multiple character perspectives while blurring the lines between autobiography and theatrical performance. Polyphonic here comes from Russian literary critic Mikhail Bakhtin, who took the word polyphony from music, wherein a piece has 2 or more simultaneous lines of independent melody. Bakhtin proposed this theory to describe how the works of Dostoevsky challenge the form of the European novel. As Switched on Pop summarize it, polyphony in literature denotes a work with many voices existing alongside one another, and that it's the dialogue of all these characters that comes together to give you meaning. Because even if Dostoevsky is the author with his own view of things, the other characters in the novel are allowed to challenge and even rebel against their creator. As Gary Morrison and Carlyle Emerson write, the polyphonic author necessarily plays 2 roles in the work. He creates a world in which many disparate points of view enter into dialogue, and, in quite a distinct role, he himself participates in that dialogue. Not only that, but to Bakhtin, a polyphonic novel consequently makes the viewer also a participant. Like with liminality in theater, you are being asked to help create meaning, almost like you're looking in a mirror.
Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme. Every stanza kind of rhymes with the last one.
While we could argue how truly polyphonic the album is, this idea of meaning being created from the conversations between different characters would explain many of the contradictions I just described. And while we're on the subject, I want to circle back to the fate of Ophelia for a moment, because it reminds me of critic Sophie Gilbert's Tortured Poets review, wherein she describes Taylor as butting up against the reality that there are no cultural models for what she's become, and thus is stuck being an extraordinarily rich, influential, and powerful woman who still, somehow, feels like she has no real power at all. This last sentiment is reflected in how many critics have written off the references to Ophelia as Taylor looking for another way to say damsel in distress. Although, to be fair, it's not like the song itself does much to dissuade that reading on the first listen. As Lindsay Zalaz writes for the New York Times, there's something dispiriting about Swift flattening one of literature's most evocatively alluring heroines into just another princess waiting for her Prince Charming, and about reducing her madness to something that could have easily been cured by the right man. But is the song just about that? Interestingly, the songwriting memo has a different chorus. So I spent years in my tower, I was just honing my powers, but I could feel it all. Perhaps the damsel in distress act is just another part of the facade. Indeed, Switched on Pop describe Hamlet the play as key to understanding the album itself, as both are about the appearances of reality, ghosts of the past telling us what to do, feigning, playing different characters, maybe even diving into madness at times. My initial theory about Ophelia was that it would be about the fans, building off the last Eras Tour mashup of Long Live, New Year's Day, and the manuscript. The manuscript and Hamlet both include stories within stories, with actors mirroring some event in the main character's past. This mashup also turns the actors into the Eras Tour dancers and the you into the audience, with the souvenir from that trip to your shores being the Eras Tour itself. When we got the lyrics, I posted a whole Coke rant on Twitter about how her muse could be her career. Now, having seen the music video and the songwriting memos,
I didn't learn anything. I was right all along.
but I want to explore another, although very similar reading that will hopefully lay the groundwork for what I'm about to say about Two Taylor theory. Essentially, if we read the song as being narrated by the poet Taylor with Showgirl Taylor as her muse, then we can see Taylor being dug from her grave as a retelling of I Can Do It With a Broken Heart with a more positive ending. While Showgirl, an embodiment of the performative aspects of Taylor's life, cannot save poet Taylor from experiencing the negative consequences of fame and folly, she can save her heart, her memories, her emotions, her stories. In this reading, the fate of Ophelia refers to Ophelia's objectification by those around her more so than it does her floptastic love life. Within the play, the fate of Ophelia is to be used as a pawn and not even able to speak of your own death on the stage. As Elaine Showalter writes in her seminal essay on Ophelia's cultural legacy, for most critics of Shakespeare, Ophelia has been an insignificant minor character in the play, touching in her weakness and madness, but chiefly interesting, of course, in what she tells us about Hamlet. And while female readers of Shakespeare have often attempted to champion Ophelia, even feminist critics have done so with a certain embarrassment. Shakespeare gives us little information from which to imagine a past for Ophelia. She appears in only 5 of the play's 20 scenes. The pre-play course of her love story with Hamlet is known only by a few ambiguous flashbacks. Her tragedy is subordinated in the play. Unlike Hamlet, she does not struggle with moral choices or alternatives. Thus, another feminist critic, Lee Edwards, concludes that it is impossible to reconstruct Ophelia's biography from the text. Quote, "We can imagine Hamlet's story without Ophelia, but Ophelia literally has no story without Hamlet." Ophelia's brother Laertes also calls her a documented madness. See, my veins of pitch black ink, I'm a crumpled up piece of paper lying here, stories of mine anymore, yada yada yada. Whereas an unnamed man tells Queen Gertrude that her speech is nothing, mere unshaped use. There's other stuff too, such as Hamlet and Laertes literally fighting atop her grave. Not even her corpse is allowed peace. The imagery of Taylor being dug out of her grave, if we ignore the perky production and vocal delivery, really makes you question what exact part of Ophelia's fate she's allegedly avoided. The Pledge Allegiance lines may even be a play on Laertes' words after finding out their father has died.
I'll take it in. I'll not be jumping wind. To hell, allegiance, vows to the blackest pit. I dare damnation.
What's that thing Taylor said in The Black Dog? Does anybody remember? Anyway, there are other direct references, such as when Ophelia says, "'Tis in my memory locked, and you yourself shall keep the key of it," in Act 1, Scene 3, although interestingly, this is said not to Hamlet, but to her brother. In Act 3, Scene 1, after Hamlet says, "I loved you not," Ophelia says, "I was the more deceived." In My Memory of the Release Party, Taylor described Ophelia as a victim not just of Hamlet's gaslighting, but of all the men around her, similar to her previous comments on Madwoman and Reputation. And speaking of Madwoman, a potential connection exists through the invocation of scorpions, although this could also be a reference to Macbeth's line, "Oh, full of scorpions is my mind, dear wife." That would also connect the song to Cancelled, which quotes Macbeth directly with "Something wicked this way comes." I've seen several people cry that there's no way Taylor could have read Hamlet because she gets the story so wrong. There's no tower, guys. And that is true, there is no big tower Ophelia's locked away in Rapunzel style. We can argue back and forth over whether Taylor intended this song to be a retelling. I mean, she didn't, but we can technically argue about it. But I think the tower imagery, especially in light of the songwriting memo, is meant to instead echo the Lady of Shalott, who was famously rendered in Lord Alfred Tennyson's 1832 poem of the same name. The Lady of Shalott is often brought up in conversations about Ophelia's legacy, as their deaths are incredibly similar, with both dying on or in the water beneath a willow tree. To give a quick summary of the poem, the Lady of Shalott is locked in a tower outside of Camelot because she's cursed with dying disease. All day she weaves, looking out at the world only through a mirror. One day she sees Lancelot in the mirror and is so overwhelmed by his beauty that she rushes to the tower window to get an eyeful of the real thing. Unfortunately, this activates her dying disease. The mirror cracked from side to side, Tennyson writes, as the lady cried, "The curse has come upon me." I feel the Lady of Shalott fits the original songwriting memo much better. As Taylor mentions in the song Cassandra, she was in her tower weaving nightmares, cursed senselessly just like the Lady of Shalott. Taylor watching the world through her mirror could then reflect how she spent years trying to write herself in and then out of famous narratives, the pain real even if the potential she imagined in the relationship, or the version of herself she had to be, was not. And again, mirror cracking. See, if we take the Apple Music thing and turn it on its side, course, the question now becomes whether any traces of these themes, of Taylor being cursed to potentially recreate Ophelia's fate not because she sucks at relationships, but because of a larger, potentially even societal curse, remain in the song we actually got. To this end, in the pirate scene of the music video, oh yeah, there's a whole off-screen scene in Hamlet where his ship is attacked by pirates, don't worry about it. The male Eras Tour dancers shove Taylor around to the lines, "You wrap around me like a chain, a crown, a vine." In Taylor's own words, this was inspired by the Eras Tour performance of The Man, a song explicitly about sexism.
There's this scene that I love that's me on a pirate ship, and I kind of wanted to sort of signal back to this moment that I really loved on the Eras Tour, which we did this performance of a song called The Man.
Further, although this may not be an intentional link, the scream she began doing during live performances of Who's Afraid of Little Old Me also appears in the scene as the background vocal on the line "Stole Her Sanity." Additionally, in the second painting that Ophelia Taylor poses for, there are two overt references to the album's title track, namely The Peach and the Pearls. Alongside these references is our first good look at the orange bird that had flown through the top of the first painting, and that will later fly out of her bathroom window right before she finishes the music video in her bathtub. More or less, back where she started, inside a reference to a painting of Ophelia, set to do it all over again in the morning. I've seen several different theories about what bird and painting she's referring to here, and I think the most convincing is the claim that the landscape behind Taylor resembles the Yorkshire moors, the setting of the secret garden. Within the book, a robin leads the main character Mary to the garden's key. Of course, a European robin is only partially orange, so perhaps the orange bird is also meant as a reference to Taylor herself in the Look What You Made Me Do music video, some part of her no longer trapped inside her bird cage, even as her physical body goes through the motions of touring. What was it she called touring in the prologue poem? A monotonous thrill? All that being said, in contrast to the disempowered Ophelia, Taylor's career, regardless of its drawbacks, gives her some degree of agency over her story that will last long after she's dead. Additionally, like I said in the Tortured Poets video, sharing her art keeps her connected to a world far outside of me, myself, and I. The key is still the Secret Garden key, the Eras Tour stage. Writing and performance move her out of merely wallowing in her memories to processing them and going back out into the world. And little side note, but Showalter contends that during the Augustan period in England, Ophelia's already small role was often censored, with her lines cut and given to a singer rather than an actress due to her levity and indecency. Ooh. So a connection to Showgirls exists there as well. There's a lot more we could discuss, such as how the pyro line resonates with Dear Readers' "Burn all the files, desert all your past lives," especially in the music video given that Taylor lights the match on herself, and the fact that a black-clad Taylor burns down the Lover house on tour. But I think, with the mention of both Midnights and the Eras Tour, we're ready to really dive into the reason I find this album interesting.
Yes. Gilbert, so good to see you. You simply must disturb us more often.
Actually, I'm trying to sleep, which is what normal people do at 3 in the morning.
Normal people? Oh, how dreadful.
As I've said before, two-Taylor theory generally conceives of two central narrators within Taylor's work, Taylor Swift the person and Taylor Swift the brand. Although I credited Gaylor's earlier, this tension between authenticity and commercialism has been noted by many critics before. Last year, Rolling Stone's Rob Sheffield predicted Taylor's renewed claims to mirrorhood with, "The most fascinating Taylor will always be the one in the music. She's the one none of us will ever understand." A jigsaw puzzle that turns out to be a mirror. Going back further, as NPR's Ann Power says in a Midnight's Era interview, "I hear a constant pulling back in Taylor. A constant, oh, how much can I say? How can I say this musically in a way that makes it still relevant to a 14-year-old, and her mom and her aunt, and the radio program where I still want to play my music, but where it feels personal." To Powers, Taylor is sharing a self that's very much of the 21st century, very much relevant to the fragmentation of the self, to the way ourselves are in dialogue with our persona. We're all in dialogue with our Instagram feeds, and she, without making a big pronouncement about doing that, found a way to write the perfect pop song about being a human who's also a persona. We're all doing that now.
Impressive. Very nice. Let's see Paul Allen Spotify Wrapped.
Indeed, the very first version of this video, written before both Showgirl and My Life Exploded, was inspired by a tweet that characterized the doppelganger's return to popular culture with movies like The Substance as a dramatization of the way we're tasked with creating commodities from only the most marketable shards of ourselves. all to gain access to a paycheck or a lover or a following. This analysis follows Jeffrey Jerome Cohen's essay Monster Culture, 7 Theses, wherein he describes monsters like vampires, ghosts, and aliens as embodiments of a certain cultural moment, of a time, a feeling, and a place. Within this framework, 2 main categories of monsters emerge. Monsters of difference, which primarily focus on vilifying minority groups and other so-called deviants, and monsters of prohibition, which serve to demarcate the bonds that hold together that system of relations we call culture, to call horrid attention to the borders that cannot, must not be crossed. Lacayon attempts to trick Zeus and is turned into a wolf. Elizabeth Sparkle attempts to reclaim her former youthful glory and, a lot of things happen, some of which involve a very horrid use of fried chicken. Additionally, Cohen writes that monsters are never created ex nihilo, but through a process of fragmentation and recombination in which elements are extracted from various forms, and then assembled as the monster, which can then claim an independent identity. Because it is a body across which difference has been repeatedly written, the monster, like Frankenstein's creature, that combination of odd somatic pieces stitched together from a community of cadavers, seeks out its author to demand its raison d'etre, and to bear witness to the fact that it could have been constructed otherwise. Interestingly, however, in movies like The Substance or Mickey 17, the doppelgangers know their raison d'etre. Instead, what they seek out their authors to demand is, why are you still here? This dynamic is literalized in Mickey 17, for instance, by the fact that having more than one clone alive at any given time is illegal, causing Mickey 18 and 17 to try to push each other into the garbage disposal from hell. Cohen's comments about monsters being created through a process of fragmentation and recombination feels particularly resonant here. Although he's specifically talking about how these elements are often taken from minority groups, like I mentioned before, we are being tasked with fragmenting and recombining ourselves just to exist in day-to-day life. Have been tasked, even. Sidoni Smith and Julia Watson wrote back in the 90s that Americans are habitual authenticators of our own lives. Every day we are confessing and constructing personal narratives in every possible format. On the body, on the air, in music, in print, on video, at meetings. If we are not telling our stories, we are consuming other people's lives. Lives authorized by and authenticated in the institutions through which we negotiate daily existence. And because this book came out of the 90s, they leave out how we largely negotiate our existences via our phones. Indeed, not having social media is at once a red flag, a suggestion to potential suitors or employers that one has something to hide, and a countercultural story in itself. It's a distraction. It was affecting my mental health. I need to get my attention span back. I have seen the deleterious effects of the system, and I am carving my own path. While the development of creator economies such as that on YouTube has dramatically democratized the lives you're able to watch, we still aren't entirely free. I'm sure you've heard plenty of YouTubers bemoan the almighty algorithm, to say nothing of how many creators rely on direct donations in order to get by. It would be well-tread ground, not just by the standards of video essays, but of cultural studies in general, to pore over how Americans use the consumption of things like cars and clothing to create our personal narratives, to take other people's personal narratives and subsume them as part of our own. And in many ways, Taylor Swift reflects this habit too. Even on albums like Folklore and Evermore, well-known national narratives like the California Gold Rush are plucked from history to become yet another metaphor for romantic escapades, while the personal narratives of people like Rebecca Harkness, and now Elizabeth Taylor, are used to scaffold the narrator's feelings. As far back as her debut single, Taylor was using others' narratives to try and construct an image of herself within the minds of her muses and music listeners. When you think Tim McGraw, I hope you think of me. Watson and Smith continue by asserting that we are a postmodern society in which the disappearance of an unproblematic belief in the idea of true selves is everywhere compensated for and camouflaged by the multiplication of recitations of autobiographical stories, and that as shit continues going south, this announcing, performing, composing of identity becomes a defining condition of postmodernity in America. Thusly, if we consider Powers correct in her assertion that Taylor's entire artistic project is her making of a self, we can see how Taylor's insane success reflects our own struggles to master and maintain a self in Darkest Timeline 2025. Even calling yourself a mirror ball girly allows you to not only announce your personal struggles with maintaining a coherent self, but to assert an identity as a Swiftie and enter into that community, all in the same breath. Alright, enough yap. What does Taylor Swift say about her monster? In the anti-hero music video, the showgirl Taylor says that she's the problem, smashes up her guitar, shoves Ponytail Taylor off the bed, shows her that everyone will betray you Blackboard, and on and on. This last example aligns with what anthropology professor Daphne Trigaki would call Taylor's sonic lyrical regime, which James Barker et al. Define as certain themes, experiences, and referential strategies that allows us to speak of the Swiftian song with a reasonable level of stability. And that, in Taylor's case, involves but is not limited to a desire for revenge and a sense of songwriting as a form of revenge. Barker and co. add that these themes have waxed and waned over the course of Swift's songwriting career, with some commentators noting a maturity from a songwriter intent on revenge and reaction in earlier work to one showing greater reflection. Although they note that Taylor's early work still has plenty of reflection, it's worth keeping this idea of songwriting as revenge in mind, especially in the context of lines like, "Oh my god, she's insane, she wrote a song about me, the girl in the dress wrote you a song," and who could forget, if guys don't want me to write bad songs about them, then they shouldn't do bad things. To John Harder, openly writing about real people and experiences is an exercise of power, a weapon, a form of social capital that will later also function as aesthetic capital. Further, the social avatar of the writer changes because it is now associated with the weaponized act of writing. Of course, Taylor has defended herself from these accusations, but as Rendleson notes, while a real person may encompass both a petty, contentious side and an emotive, sensitive side, there is no room for both in a public persona, at least not one that is young and female. To quote Swift herself, "The media does indeed turn her into a fictional character, but one must not forget that Taylor Swift is the media, too." Showgirl Taylor's idea that everyone will betray you also comes up beyond the explicit idea of revenge. Songs like Afterglow and The Great War portray Taylor as picking fights due to past hurts, whereas songs like I Did Something Bad say, "This is how the world works, you gotta leave before you get left," which is then dramatized in The Bolter. These ideas and behaviors are all nicely tied together by Pete Walker, who trauma video enjoyers may remember for his work on CPTSD and his theory of inner versus outer critics. In A Traumatized Child, the inner critic and the outer critic serve as maladaptive coping mechanisms, the inner critic internalizing everything happening to them as their fault, leading to the child's withdrawal from the world, and the outer critic externalizing the pain and shame onto the rest of the world, again leading to withdrawal. As Walker describes, the outer critic projects onto others the same processes of perfectionism and endangerment that the inner critic uses against the self. It builds fortresses of isolation, whose walls are enumerations of the exaggerated shortcomings and potential treacheries of others. In an awful irony, the critic attempts to protect us from abandonment by scaring us further into it. TLDR, I drew curtains closed, drank my poison all alone. Indeed, one of my other pre-release theories about Showgirl revolved around how the latter half of the album is made entirely of explicit and generally shorter songs. Given how weird and instantly visible the shift is, I thought the album would be showcasing the takeover of the Showgirl, the outer critic persona. In a way, I was right. We can trace the arc of father figure, eldest daughter, and ruin the friendship at the protege of the first song getting out from under her abuser's thumb and then fumbling to learn how to express herself authentically to her audience, before she finds her words and offers advice more self-assuredly and ruin the friendship. However, this advice comes with too vulnerable an admission, because the song right after, Actually Romantic, is in full outer critic mode, antagonizing its muse even as the narrator presents herself as above it all. Wishless and Honey, love songs they are, still lash out at others outside the relationship, saying the world needs to leave us the fuck alone, and calling other women bitches. And Cancelled speaks for itself. That said, Cancelled has some interesting lyrical parallels with Father Figure. I drank that brown liquor becoming I like my whiskey sour, the threat of finding your card cancelled, I can make deals with the Dark Lord Lucifer because my wiener is of a longer length, becoming welcome to my underworld. And even you remind me of a younger me, sounding awfully similar to saying your true friends are those with matching scars. In the bridge of Cancelled, the narrator says they'll take the now cancelled woman by the hand, a less intimate version of I dry your tears with my sleeve, and teach her how to not get caught, similarly to Father Figure's narrator, or second narrator depending on how you read it, saying that they've covered up their muse's scandals. And while we're on this song, have you guys noticed there's a lot of hell imagery in this album? The muse of Ophelia pulls her from purgatory into the fire. The narrator of Father Figure is making the devil pull out the Gatorade bottle to show scale. And if we view the keychain in Father Figure as signifying the protege taking over as a narrator, then she's now the ruler of hell, which would explain all the parallels with Cancelled. In the songwriting memo of the title track, one of the original ad-libs is, "Don't know the keys and the price, and the hole they push you in, and push the dirt all over your skin and bones." Even in the final version, showgirls are ripped off like false lashes and left for dead. The narrator may mock the other women who want her to hurry up and die, but given all the suicidality in the last album, the line, "But I'm immortal now, baby dolls, I couldn't if I tried," holds some bitterness alongside its triumph. In the Ophelia section, I mentioned the possibility of Taylor being cursed by her society rather than by her own foibles, and I think the title track is where this becomes most evident. The title track's opening lyrics seemingly play off of Rudy Valley's 1931 song Kitty from Kansas City, which opens with the lines,
Her name was Kitty from Kansas City. Sure was a pity she wasn't pretty.
Sounds like my Rudy.
The song focuses on how Kitty is ugly, fat, and dumb, but the narrator loves her because she does womanly things like cooking and has a pussy like a penny flattener. Not only did this recall the removed fat scale in the anti-hero video, but ties showgirlhood into a cultural legacy of female disposability, one that the narrator of Ophelia escaped, and one that the narrator of the title track knowingly upholds. She's reached the top, she's paid her dues, and if you recall the songwriting memo, she even told her reflection that she's not cut out for this life. But here she is anyway. Additionally, rather than Sabrina and Taylor playing clear-cut roles of mentor and protege, Sabrina enters into the song by narrating Kitty's backstory, generational divides blurring as the stories of older showgirls spill over and onto those of the younger. And so the album ends like Tortured Poet's Clairbow, with the cycle starting again. I've repeatedly mentioned Showgirl being the end of the Midnight's trilogy, and there are several reasons why I think Taylor wants us to see the album that way. Within days of announcing the album, for instance, she liked several tweets connecting the life of a showgirl to both the Antihero and Bejeweled music videos, with Taylor Nation even using Bejeweled in the release party's trailer. Pat McGrath, who played Queen Pat in the Bejeweled music video, even called that video the start of the Showgirl era in a recent interview.
We're going to start with the Taylor Swift Bejeweled video. It was the beginning of the tease of the Showgirl, and I actually was in it.
Although admittedly it's unclear how official her words should be. Far as lyrical callbacks, The Fate of Ophelia repeatedly mentions the sleepless night, whereas Midnight's concept revolved around 13 sleepless nights. Opalite mentions that the narrator used to live with ghosts, another callback to Antihero. Finally, Wood's image of a naked Daisy has been taken by many as a tongue-in-cheek reference to You're on Your Own, Kid. We could further parallel the photo shoots being labeled as bait by the fan base, as well as the fact that the album seemingly started off tonally darker before changing course. Even the album's structures have been similarly received, with many people saying that Midnights and Showgirl start off strong before being watered down by their glitter pen heavy second halves. Side note, but when I was explaining this point to my brother-in-law, he said it sounded an awful lot like Eminem's Kamikaze, and I just found that to be really funny. Anyway, to top it off, blue and orange are complementary colors, the same colors that emanated from Taylor and her muse in the Fortnite music video, and that, once touching, created an explosion. Given her portrayal in the Antihero music video, it's easy to assume Showgirl is an entirely negative force in Taylor's life. After all, we're introduced to her when she stops inner Taylor from escaping her ghost-infested house. To return to Cohen, the monster stands as a warning against exploration of its uncertain domains. The giants of Patagonia, the dragons of the Orient, and the dinosaurs of Jurassic Park together declare that curiosity is more often punished than rewarded, that one is better off safely contained within one's own domestic sphere than abroad, away from the watchful eyes of the state. Perhaps, though, Showgirl Taylor's kinda onto something. After all, didn't poet Taylor write about the loss of her life with lines like, "I thought I was better safe than starry-eyed"? Cohen finishes his thought with, "The monster prevents mobility, intellectual, geographic, or sexual, delimiting the social spaces through which private bodies may move. To step outside this official geography is to risk attack by some monstrous border patrol, or, worse, to become monstrous oneself." Which is interesting considering that big monster on a hill Taylor is first seen inside the house, bulging at her confines before she's attacked by an archer bearing orange arrows. That said, I think older portrayals of Showgirl paint a more nuanced portrait. Take the Ready For It music video. Black-clad Taylor, a proto-Showgirl, moves through the cyberpunk world full of hostile androids before reaching the Taylor trapped inside a glass box, an image she will return to in the Look What You Made Me Do Eras Tour performance and the Willow music video. The Taylor inside the box is wearing a skin-colored suit that can morph into armor and a horse, presumably as a nod to the Blank Space music video, as that also satirized her public persona. Taylor has compared her respective writing reputation to a wounded animal lashing out, represented here by the shifting armor, the laser gun firing at black-clad Taylor, and the split second of the snake crawling up her face. Still, the Taylor outside the glass attempts to join with the Taylor inside. After the glass has been broken, we see the outside Taylor's skin rip, revealing her robotic innards. This robot Taylor, this false persona, attracts the other robots to attack her, while inner Taylor runs free. Note how "they're burning all the witches" is written on the ledge where Showgirl Taylor stands. Of course, we now know the rest of the lyric is, "even if you aren't one." And while we're talking about Ready For It, it's worth noting that not only was this song used to promote the life of a showgirl, but that Elizabeth Taylor and her relationship with Richard Burton are referenced throughout it. Forcing myself to not lore dump for the next 10 minutes. Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton met on the set of the 1963 film Cleopatra While Married to Other People, and their affair became such a global shit show that the Vatican publicly condemned Liz, leading to someone trying to bomb her on the set. Not only that, but their relationship essentially invented the paparazzi, as the Italian photo hounds were trying to break into their house to get pictures. Still, Burton and Liz would try to make a game of cops and robbers out of the situation to cope. In this slide, "He Can Be My Jailer," as well as the earlier "Knew You as a Robber" line, are references to Liz and Dick's attempts to compartmentalize the trauma of being under siege in their own home. A siege is so constant that Liz literally couldn't open the door without the chance of someone trying to shove their way and camera in. If we move from the Burn to this Taylor line to the I'm So Very Tame one shortly thereafter, we have a reference to another of Shakespeare's plays, The Taming of the Shrew, which also contains a play within a play. A drunkard, convinced he's a nobleman, is being shown a play where a woman who rejects the patriarchal trappings of her society is married off and abused by her husband until she becomes a complacent wife. Now, this is one of those plays where the directing and acting choices fundamentally change the tone. See, at the end of the play, Katharina, the Shrew, gives a long speech about how women should submit to their husbands, which many play as her realizing that if she goes along with gender roles in public, she can have more freedom in the private sphere of her marriage. No, guys, I'm totally just pretending to be a Holodomor shell of my former self because of my husband's abuse.
Unknit that threatening, unkind brow, and dart not scornful glances from those eyes to wound thy lord, thy king, thy governor. Bless thy beauty, as much as my needs. My husband is like, Lord, my life. I keep my head, I suffer, one that cares for thee. That's why maintenance is body too painful.
Indeed, a lot of performances even play up the couple's antics to farcical levels. One US production in 1935 portrayed Kate as yelling her early dialogue from offstage, accompanied by the sounds of her breaking plates and throwing shoes. She even smashes a harp over a guy's head, while another character skips sausages like jump rope. And if that's not enough, Kate and Petruchio ascend to heaven in the end in the golden chariot. I am not kidding. As literary critic Harold Bloom writes, in her final speech, Kate is not submitting, but advising women how to rule absolutely, while feigning obedience. Both Burn and Liz started a 1967 adaptation of Shrew while married, with Liz even producing the film. In this version, although Liz plays the final speech pretty straightforwardly, after Burn's Petruchio turns to brag about his victory to the other men, Liz's Kate slips away, forcing him to run after her amid jeers from the men and an attempted blockade from the women. Given all this, I'm certain Taylor Swift is playing into the same tongue-in-cheek reading. Reputation, after all, has a lot of giving people what they want, so the line functions as an ironic reference to the idea that a man can tame her, even as she's telling him, baby, let the games begin. If we put all these pieces together, we can perhaps understand why the life of a showgirl ended up so different from his songwriting memos. Although the brand of Taylor Swift comes to represent all of her most antisocial traits, it also serves as a protective shell, an exaggeration that keeps critics boxing with shadows, rather than the vulnerable girl hidden beneath. That's not to say the album has absolutely zero vulnerability, but even the narrator of track 5 fumbles to extract herself from all the irony poisoning and begs her addressee to see her for who she truly is. In another parallel, Liz once told the reporter Richard Merriman that Elizabeth Taylor, the famous one, really had no depth or meaning to me. It makes money. One is flesh and blood, and the other is cellophane. This may also explain another common complaint I've seen about the faithlessness of Showgirl's lyricism. How, despite Travis Kelce being shoved in our faces as the de facto muse, we really don't learn a lot about him, other than he's nice to her, they have good sex, and she wants to pop out a whole football team's worth of his kids. To me, songs like Wishless and Honey wouldn't feel out of place on Lover, and if we're talking purely about getting me to understand why you're attracted to someone, So High School clears everything on this album easily. Indeed, I've even seen some Swifties go as far as to say that this doesn't feel like a Taylor Swift album, but I've also spoken to people who really like that element of it. And honestly, who can blame them? The muse discourse in this fandom is completely cancerous. I've literally seen people arguing over which funeral she went to and ruin the friendship. And to return to the idea of Showgirl as the anti-tortured poets, one of the biggest criticisms of tortured poets was that you needed to be a PhD-level Swiftorian to understand it. A massively overstated criticism, but whatever. In the prologue poem, she lists never believe your own mythology as the first mantra in her strict code to stay sane, which, in context, is almost certainly just a fancier way of saying, don't believe your own hype. But I find it interesting how it foreshadows the relative lorelessness of this album. Really, the only songs I think you need lore to understand are actually romantic and maybe cancelled. Others include Father Figure in this group, but I've seen excellent edits of Father Figure to things like the live-action Alvin and the Chipmunks movies, so how lore-dependent is it really? If we think back to the album's shards motif, then what we're getting is less the mere exploding to expose the true vulnerable core beneath, but exploding to show there's never anything under it at all. Which sounds extremely harsh, I know, so let me unpack it a little more. If The Life of a Showgirl is the end of the Midnight's trilogy, then it's the end because it completes Midnight's attempt to make peace with the Showgirl monster. After all, as Cohen writes, monsters are never fully dead, and when they come back, they bring not just a fuller knowledge of our place in history and the history of knowing our place, but they bear self-knowledge, human knowledge, and a discourse all the more sacred as it arises from the outside. These monsters ask us how we perceive the world and how we have misrepresented what we have attempted to place. Under the current fragmenting conditions of our culture, however, the monster is not merely you, but the better version of you, the one who is better at living your life than you are. We have misrepresented ourselves and our place in the world, and now find ourselves outside of it. Wouldn't it be cruel to ask the other you to leave? Rendelssohn makes an interesting comparison between the anti-hero music video and Sylvia Plath's poem In Plaster, which narrativizes self-hatred through a separate subject, splintered into this new absolutely white person and the old yellow one. The yellow, ugly, and hairy one is weak, sickly, violent, while the other is tidy, calm, and patient. As the plaster person becomes less like its yellow template, the more the speaker loses of herself, quote, "My skin itched and flaked away in soft pieces." Rendelssohn compares Showgirl to the plaster person not merely in her parasitic relationship to her original, but in how she doesn't need food, and how the plaster person initially seems more like a dead body, lacking personality and never complaining. In this sense, she seems more like a sex doll than anything else, the perfect woman in the patriarchy, not a woman at all, not even a person. Swift's lyric, "Sometimes I feel like everybody is a sexy baby," has been commented on by many, some finding it strange and pedophilic, some seeing it as incomprehensible and amusing. The sexy baby is the plaster sex doll, the uncomplaining sweet and empty servant with an unblemished surface, unburdened with a past or anything that makes her a real adult person. Although we can't accuse Showgirl of having no personality, the rest of the comparison holds, right down to Showgirl's outfit being the initially more revealing of the two, and, perhaps, in how the Showgirl album photo shoot is unapologetically sensual, yet still replete with exit signs, wigs and costumes being put on and taken off, and, again, so many fragmented body parts. Midnights, in some ways, attempted to make peace with the Showgirl by ending the standard version with the song Mastermind, even if the 3 a.m. edition ending with Dear Reader undermined that. Indeed, I'd argue the entire track run from Vigilante Shit to Mastermind is her reaffirming the use of the Showgirl, moving between songs that embody her and songs that reinforce the relationship that supposedly gave her Monster on a Hillside room to breathe. This is especially true in the Midnight set of the Eras Tour, which begins with songs that directly or indirectly ask, who is the real Taylor Swift, and was all this bullshit worth it? Before moving into songs that answer, yes, it was. To give an example of what I mean, the anti-hero performance again splits Taylor into two. On stage we have the small performing Taylor being followed, shouted at, nearly stepped on, and finally abandoned by the bigger Tayzilla. At the end of the performance, right before it leads into Midnight Rain, the Monster on a Hill Taylor forlornly looks back over her shoulder at stage Taylor, who is only looking out at the crowd. Rendelssohn writes that this portrayal of the Showgirl persona aims to make the audience realize their own culpability in a real person's pain. What happens if the audience does not care? Swift's struggles are the direct consequence of her fame, to which the audience contributes when consuming and engaging with her art. However, she has actively chosen to continue her career in the spotlight, publishing songs of a confessional nature, aware of the consequences. This situation might, perhaps, be most appropriately described by Swift and her audience singing the line, "It's me, hi, I'm the problem, it's me," in harmony with each other. This tension, however, is then alleviated when we transition into the song Midnight Rain, wherein Taylor reassures the audience and herself that, even if she gets some kind of haunted by her lost lives, her transformation was ultimately for the better. After all, the boy is a montage and a postcard, little and most importantly, highly curated glimpses of happiness. Vigilante Shit right after relishes in Taylor getting revenge on those who have wronged her, and Bejeweled literalizes the process of stepping into the Showgirl persona. Oh, you want to ignore me? Well, I'll remind you who's the highlight of every party, and what's brighter at a party than the mirror ball. I want to turn back to the first real instance of Taylor becoming a mirror ball, Blank Space. Rendelssohn writes that the title Blank Space is extremely suggestive. There is a vacancy at the center, in which anything can be projected, a vacuum in the place of a sign, in which any signifier or referent can exist. An alternative analysis places the blank space at the center of Swift herself. The idea of Taylor Swift as a container for the grand narratives of corporations, cultures, and ideologies. The addressee, then, is not the lover, but the audience. Taylor Swift TM is the sign onto which anyone may project, the tabula rasa on which one can write anything. Only in this case, Swift is the one holding the pen, reclaiming herself by performing as and parodying the idea projected onto her. Indeed, if we look back at our reading of Ready For It, the inner Taylor's frequent shapeshifting feels even more prescient. Like I mentioned before, Powers describes Taylor's entire artistic project as her making of a self, stating that we could think of her as a self-portrait artist, the painter who paints himself over and over again. And who is in the frame if it's not Taylor? Maybe here's a better question. Who's in the self if you're having to constantly make one? This, to me, is the most compelling reading of the life of a showgirl, regardless of its intentionality. The title track's lyrics suggest that Taylor is now immortal, that the ink in her veins is now frozen into ice. All narratives end here, at the realization that there's no escape route that Taylor is willing to take. To go back to the marriage metaphor I used at the start, this would be the radical acceptance part of marriage counseling, acknowledging that this life is what it is and choosing to love it as best you can. After all, in the prologue poem, she said that even at her darkest and drunkest, she wouldn't have chosen any differently. Easy to say when you've been in this life for considerably longer than you were out of it, but as Taylor assured us back in I Hate It Here, she can be bitter and fine. But as Reynoldson asked of the song Mirror Ball, if the authentic self never shows or interacts with its surroundings, is it real in any way that matters? If the performance never ceases, and the authentic self never reveals itself, does not the performance at some point become the authentic self? Or, to finally circle back to that Kurt Vonnegut quote at the start of the video, we are what we pretend to be, so we must be careful about what we pretend to be. If we recall the idea of polyphony, though, then the character with ink in her veins is just as valid as the one with ice, regardless of who Taylor herself picks. Indeed, I've even seen some interesting readings of this album as a story of saving oneself. As she says in both Opalite and Wood, after all, you have to make your own luck. Comparing Showgirl to Tortured Poets and even Midnights, I'm reminded of an old essay called The Benefits of Being a Suicidal Curmudgeon, wherein author Glenn Trujillo Jr. writes that suicide is a core concern of French existentialism, with Jean-Paul Sartre arguing, in Trujillo's words, that in choosing not to complete suicide, we affirm responsibility for every action because we could have chosen otherwise. Suicide's possibility upholds our agency and freedom. The essay itself focuses on the philosophy of Emile Coran, who has takes about this topic that have not been taken before or since. One of the more relatively normal ones being that, in seriously contemplating suicide, you can become a better, more fully realized version of yourself. The wise person entertains the thought thoroughly enough to die once intellectually, and to be reborn through further action. No one is freer than the dead, unencumbered by yesterday's pacts and tomorrow's obligations. Quran might say, live as if you are already dead, not because you recoil at the thought, but because you left the corpse of your life and its values behind. Maybe that's what dug me out of my grave meant all along. With no grand narratives left standing besides her own, the stars that were aligning by the pocketful back in Midnights have been called out for their uselessness, and the night Showgirl and her muse have awoken from is a starless onyx. Obviously, we could be here another hour if we unpacked all this, but I hope these snippets are enough for you to see why the line, life is a song, it ends when it ends, sounds an awful lot like Trujillo saying, life ain't serious enough to kill yourself over. Where does Taylor go from here is a question we seem to ask every album cycle, usually alongside the eternal debate over whether she's become unrelatable. Lisa Rogers of the New York Times addresses this head-on with, because it should matter. Once you're a showgirl, you'll never be anyone's girl next door, again. Based on what I've outlined in this video, though, this constant mutating of Taylor's personas is arguably more relatable than the girl next door, especially since many so-called girls next doors grew up cutting off pieces of themselves to fit inside that mold. And personally, if Taylor's project is going to continue being the poster child for the postmodern composing and performing of the self, I'd rather she take Showgirl's criticism as permission to mutate into even weirder forms. And regardless, under the lens of biographical performativity, when your self is just another text, then it, like other texts, is never quite finished anyway, even long after it's been published. In other words, the story don't stop till the storyteller drops, and maybe not even then. So why not let the song play? That's it for the video, guys. Thank you so much if you've watched here to the end, and thank you all so much if you watched my Tortured Poets video. I am just blown away by the response that it's gotten. I genuinely never would have imagined it got that many views. But anyway, if you like this video, please subscribe, like, comment, share, all that. If you want to give me money, because you just feel like it, I'll have my Ko-Fi link in the description down below. Don't feel pressured. I am not financially hurting. Do not feel pressured. This is purely just because you want to. Anyway, I will see you in the next one.